Karl Alfalfa Switzer, the former child star of Our Gang, was shot and killed in 1959 during a dispute over a cash reward related to a lost hunting dog. After finding and returning the dog, Switzer demanded $50 from the dog's owner, Moses Stiltz, resulting in a heated argument at Stiltz's home. Alfalfa allegedly struck Stiltz with a clock, prompting Stiltz to grab his revolver and shoot Alfalfa in the groin, which he eventually bled out from. While Stiltz claimed self-defense, saying Alfalfa threatened him with a knife, a witness later stated that the actor was leaving when he was shot. Despite conflicting accounts, the killing was ruled justifiable and Stiltz was never charged. In 2005, Kenneth Pinion, a renowned Boeing engineer known online as Mr. Hands, died after engaging in receptive intercourse with a stallion on a Washington farm, an act that was recorded by a friend. The incident caused a fatal perforation in his colon, and he was dropped off at a local hospital where he died shortly afterwards. As a direct result, the state passed a law in 2006 criminalizing both bestiality and the creation of such videos. Isaac Hayes, the iconic soul singer who played Chef on South Park, left the show in 2006 under mysterious circumstances. A statement was released in his name, claiming he was against the show's mocking of Scientology, which he practiced. However, creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone were skeptical, noting his prior support for the show's satire of other religions. It turned out that at the time, Hayes had just suffered a debilitating stroke that impaired his ability to communicate, and his son later revealed that Isaac's fellow Scientologists spoke on his behalf while he was incapacitated. South Park responded with the episode The Return of Chef, portraying Chef as brainwashed by a cult before he's brutally killed off. The show's creators assembled Chef's lines by splicing together audio clips from previous episodes.
No, Chef, they filled your head with lies. Can't you see that?
Get the hell out of here.
Hayes tragically died in 2008 after being found unconscious next to a running treadmill, the result of another stroke. In 2003, 28-year-old marine biologist Kirsty Brown became the first known human killed by a leopard seal while she was snorkeling near a research station in Antarctica. Without warning, the seal grabbed her by the head and dragged her beneath the icy water, diving down for several minutes and resurfacing with her body before diving down again several times, eventually pulling her as deep as 230 feet. Her colleagues watched helplessly as the powerful predator treated her like prey, mimicking the way it would typically toy with penguins before drowning them. After holding her underwater for 6 minutes, the seal finally released Kirsty, but despite desperate CPR attempts, she never regained consciousness. In 2012, NYPD officer Gilberto Valle was arrested after his wife discovered he'd been posting on fetish forums about kidnapping, torturing, and eating women, including her. He had detailed abduction plans, photos of real women he said he was targeting, and even searched online for recipes for cooking human meat. The FBI found his chats on a site called Dark Fetish Net, where he discussed taking advantage of his police access to stalk victims. Though convicted in 2013 for conspiracy to kidnap, his conviction was later overturned when a judge ruled the evidence was insufficient to prove intent, calling the chats fantasy roleplay. An appeals court upheld the acquittal, stating that, while disturbing, his actions were protected under the First Amendment. In 2019, 18-year-old Denali Bremer from Alaska was messaged by a wealthy tycoon named Tyler, who promised her $9 million if she murdered someone and sent him the proof. Convinced the offer was real, Bremer recruited several friends whom she told she would split the money with, and they chose to target 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman, a developmentally disabled girl who considered Bremer her best friend. The group lured Cynthia on a fake hiking trip to Thunderbird Falls, where they bound her with duct tape and led her to a remote spot. That's when one of the friends shot her in the back of the head while Bremer filmed the murder and sent the footage to Tyler, after which they dumped the body in the river. Authorities uncovered the plot through digital evidence, leading to multiple arrests. Tyler ended up being an unemployed catfisher named Darren Schillmiller who lived in his parents' basement in Indiana. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 99 years in prison, the same sentence handed to Bremer. Creator of Naruto Masashi Kishimoto endured a grueling work schedule that pushed him to the brink of physical and emotional collapse. He routinely worked up to 20 hours per day, leading to several hospitalizations, and even missing the birth of his own child due to crushing deadlines. By the final arcs of Naruto, he admitted to feeling emotionally numb, simply trying to survive the demands of the series. Writing certain death scenes took a drastic personal toll on him, and he received constant death threats from fans over controversial plot decisions. Much of his work was inspired by feelings of deep isolation and insecurity, stemming from his youth and the constant comparisons to his twin twin brother. These personal struggles bled into Naruto's themes of loneliness, rejection, and the desperate need for acknowledgement. In 1992, Pepsi launched a promotion in the Philippines called Number Fever, offering 1 million pesos to anyone with the winning bottle cap number, a life-changing prize for most people in the country at the time. On May 25th, the winning number announced was 349, but due to a printing error, over 600,000 caps with that number had been distributed. Thousands of people thought they had won, only to be told their prizes wouldn't be honored, and chaos quickly ensued. Riots broke out, Pepsi trucks were bombed, and at least 5 people were killed, including a mother and her child when a grenade was thrown at a delivery truck. Pepsi offered small consolation payments, but the damage was done. The scandal became one of the most infamous marketing disasters in history, and Pepsi never fully regained public trust in the Philippines. Celine Dion lost both her husband and brother to cancer within the same week in 2016. She performed shortly after their deaths, later saying the stage was the only place she didn't feel pain. In 2021, a 45-year-old man named Thangula Satish died in India after his rooster, armed with a 3-inch blade for an illegal cockfight, slashed his groin as it tried to escape, severing a major artery and causing him to bleed out before he reached the hospital. The rooster was briefly detained at a police station before being transferred to a local farm. In 1974, the mutilated body of a woman was found neatly placed on a beach blanket in the dunes of Provincetown, Massachusetts. Her hands were missing, her teeth removed, and her skull was crushed on one side, yet her hair was styled and her toenails painted. Known for decades only as the Lady of the Dunes, her identity remained a mystery despite widespread speculation. Over the years, she was linked to escaped convicts, mob enforcers, and even a missing extra from the film set of Jaws. Finally, in 2022, nearly 50 years later, forensic genealogy identified her as 37-year-old Ruth Marie Terry from Tennessee, and her husband, a con man with a dark past, was named the likely killer. During a pro wrestling tag team match in 2015, Rey Mysterio delivered a routine dropkick intended to set up his signature 619 move against Perro Aguayo Jr., but Aguayo slumped lifelessly onto the ropes. Unbeknownst to everyone at first, Aguayo had suffered a fatal cervical spine injury, likely caused by the whiplash to his neck from the dropkick. The match eerily continued on for several minutes before anyone realized that something was seriously wrong. Aguayo was soon rushed to the hospital, but was pronounced dead shortly afterwards. The cause of death was later determined to be cardiac arrest, due to a cervical stroke caused by 3 fractured vertebrae. The coroner stated that the fractures took place at 2 different moments of impact and that Aguayo died almost immediately. Although Mysterio bore no blame, the incident left him devastated since Aguayo had been his longtime friend. It remains one of the only times a pro wrestler died during a match from in-ring trauma. Adult star Faye Reagan appeared in over 400 films before vanishing into obscurity following her 2014 retirement. Her life quickly spiraled into constant legal troubles, hard drug use, and homelessness. On May 7th of this year, she mysteriously disappeared from East Charleston Boulevard in Las Vegas, a corridor infamous for crime and desperation. Last seen wearing green sweatpants and carrying a backpack, Reagan has not been seen or heard from since. Photographer Sam Davis captured the incredible moment a snake eel burst out from a heron's stomach while the bird was still flying, having chewed its way through the heron's throat using its pointed tail. Both animals were likely fatally injured. In the 90s, Disney planned to open a theme park called Disney's America near the Civil War battlefields in Virginia. A Disney executive said the park would let visitors feel what it was like to be a slave. Amid intense public outrage and political pressure, Disney ended up scrapping the disastrous project. In the summer of 1974, 18-year-old Disneyland cast member Deborah Gale was assigned to the newly opened America Sings ride in Tomorrowland, a rotating theater that featured animatronic animals singing songs from different eras of American history. The attraction had only been open for 9 days when something went horribly wrong during her shift on July 8th. At some point during the rotation, Deborah became caught in a narrow gap between a moving theater wall and a stationary platform. As the mechanism turned, she was crushed in the machinery, likely killing her immediately. Guests seated nearby heard her screams followed by a loud thud, but tragically mistook both for sound effects from the show. In 2009, a member of Al-Qaeda attempted to assassinate Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Nayef by hiding a pound of explosives inside his anus, an unprecedented tactic at the time. Disguised as a remorseful militant surrendering during Ramadan, the terrorist was allowed close access to the prince and even passed through metal detectors without detection. Once face to face, he detonated the device, but his own body absorbed most of the blast, killing him instantly while only slightly injuring the startled prince. In August of 1993, 4-year-old Derek Roby had been walking alone to summer camp when 13-year-old Eric Smith lured him into the woods under the guise of showing him a new shortcut. Once they were out of sight, Smith strangled Derek until he was unconscious, brutally smashed his head with a large rock, then poured Kool-Aid into the boy's wounds. Before fleeing the scene, Smith removed one of Derek's shoes and scattered the contents of his lunchbox all around him, creating a disturbing and almost ritualistic display that baffled investigators. The child's body was found later that day, just yards from the park he never made it to. Smith later confessed and was tried as an adult despite his young age, receiving 9 years to life in prison. He was denied parole 10 times over the years, with Derek's family attending each hearing to oppose his release. After 27 years behind bars, Smith was finally granted parole in 2022, sparking debates about whether someone capable of such violence at 13 can ever truly be reformed. In 2012, a freak accident saved this woman's life in the craziest way possible. 42-year-old Donna Barber was at a family gathering in Arkansas when her teenage son accidentally shot her straight in the neck with a bow and arrow. The arrow pierced the side of her throat just inches from her carotid artery, close enough that she could feel her pulse pounding against the shaft. For a moment, Dawn remained standing in shock before collapsing in a pool of her own blood. As her family screamed in panic, some believing they just witnessed her death, she was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. But during emergency scans, doctors made a chilling discovery. Nestled deep in her neck, not far from the arrow's path, was a cancerous tumor growing in her thyroid. It hadn't caused any symptoms yet, and without the arrow, it likely would have gone unnoticed until it was far too late. Surgeons carefully removed the arrow then the tumor in a single surgery, and Dawn miraculously went on to make a full recovery. In 2002, New York City bartender Sean Doyle was out drinking with his friend Michael Wright when a drunken argument suddenly broke out after Wright accused Doyle of flirting with his girlfriend. In a fit of rage, Wright threw Doyle down an open manhole and he immediately started screaming in agony from below. The shaft led down to a steam tunnel where a ruptured vent had caused the water temperature to reach an estimated 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Doyle survived the fall and was pleading for help while trapped in the boiling water, but the heat and steam were far too intense for rescuers to reach him. Witnesses reported hearing his screams echoing through the streets like a whistling tea kettle, then abruptly stopping. His body was finally recovered 4 hours later, and the medical examiner later described the scene as one of the worst she'd ever seen. The metal of his belt buckle had partially fused with his pelvis, and steam had filled up his lungs until they completely ruptured. His skin had completely peeled away, and his organs were essentially steamed like a lobster. A French woman was scammed out of 830,000 euros after falling for an elaborate scheme involving an AI-generated version of Brad Pitt. It began in 2023 when someone posing as Pitt's mother contacted her online, followed by Brad himself claiming he was battling kidney cancer and desperately needed financial help or else he was gonna die. He sent AI-generated hospital photos showing himself bruised and hooked up to machines. Over time, the woman was manipulated into believing they were in a secret relationship, one he swore had to be kept quiet because of restrictive Hollywood contracts. She even believed they were engaged and that he planned to move to France to marry her. She wired him thousands for fake medical bills and customs fees for luxury gifts that he sent her but never arrived. After her husband divorced her over the delusion, she sent the scammers 775,000 euros she received from the settlement. Despite repeated warnings, she insisted it was true love until she eventually realized she had thrown her entire life away for a fake person. Pop icon Claude Francois, often hailed as the French Elvis, met a gruesome end in 1978 when he tried to fix a flickering light bulb while standing in a bathtub filled with water. The 39-year-old received a severe electric shock that immediately fried his internal organs and stopped his heart. A family preparing to bury a loved one was shocked to find that one of the burial plots they had purchased was already occupied. Despite extensive efforts, no one could determine who the mystery individual was or how they ended up buried there. Rather than exhume the remains, the family decided to let the unknown person rest in peace, marking the grave with a headstone that simply read, "Random Person." In the 1960s, the CIA was looking for creative ways to spy on the Russians without being noticed. That's when they came up with the genius idea to use a cat to record Russian conversations. A veterinary surgeon implanted a microphone in the cat's ear and a radio transmitter at the base of its skull. The plan was for the cat to be released near a Soviet embassy and innocuously record any dialogue amongst the men. But after 5 years of research and $20 million in funding, the cat was struck and killed by a taxicab almost immediately. While filming Jackass No. 2, Johnny Knoxville attempted a motocross backflip that went horribly wrong when the bike crashed down handlebars first directly onto his crotch. Knoxville was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered the trauma had torn his urethra and partially detached it from his bladder. For the next 3 years, he had to perform painful self-catheterization twice daily to keep the torn tissue from sealing shut. He later described the sensation of pushing a tube through the raw, unhealed tissue as like jamming a knife into an open wound every single day. The risk of infection was constant, and any mistake could have led to permanent urinary dysfunction or worse. In 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished from his family's tent during a camping trip in Louisiana, sparking a frantic 8-month search. He was eventually found in Mississippi with another family who insisted that he was actually their son, Bruce Anderson. But sadly, the Andersons didn't have the money to fight this in court, so they lost custody of the child. The Dunbars took the boy home and raised him as their son Bobby Dunbar for the remainder of his life. Decades later, in 2004, DNA testing confirmed that the boy they took from the Andersons was not Bobby Dunbar, as the real Bobby Dunbar's fate remains unknown to this day. Actor Daniel Hovels accidentally slit his own throat on stage during a 2008 theatrical performance after his prop knife was somehow switched out for a real one. The audience initially thought it was all just an elaborate special effect. The blade had just barely missed Hovels' carotid artery, but he was back on stage the next day. The leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women in America is homicide. This is often driven by partner violence that is escalated or triggered by the pregnancy, stemming from jealousy, fear of responsibility, and financial stress. In 2014, a crematorium in Virginia caught fire during the cremation of a 500-pound body. The excessive body fat caused the furnace to overheat, igniting the building's roof. A Florida musician known as Prince Midnight constructed a fully functional electric guitar he dubbed the Skelecaster, using the skeletal remains of his deceased Uncle Philip. Philip had donated his skeleton to a medical college in Greece, but after 2 decades, the school no longer had any use for them, so the remains were returned to his family. Prince Midnight decided to honor his uncle, who introduced him to heavy metal music, by turning his ribcage, spinal column, and pelvis into a guitar. In one of the most horrifying cases of human captivity, Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his own daughter Elizabeth in a hidden basement beneath their Austrian home for 24 years, beginning in 1984. He repeatedly tortured and raped her, fathering 7 of her children, 3 of whom were raised in the underground dungeon without ever seeing daylight. The space was initially built as a bomb shelter and had no windows, was soundproofed, and could only be accessed through a series of hidden electronically locked doors that Fritzl installed himself. The monster kept up a front by convincing authorities and his wife that Elizabeth had joined a cult, even forging letters to support the lie. But the case was exposed in 2008 when one of the captive children fell critically ill and was brought to a hospital, prompting an investigation. Fritzl was arrested, convicted of many awful crimes, and sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility. The dungeon was later sealed with concrete, while Elizabeth and her surviving children were placed under new identities. Juana Barraza, known as the Little Old Lady Killer, was a Mexican professional wrestler who murdered at least 16 elderly women in Mexico City between 1998 and 2006. She posed as a social worker to gain access to her victims' homes, then strangled them, often with cords or her bare hands, and stole their belongings. Her strength and wrestling background, performing under the name the Lady of Silence, made her attacks especially brutal. Panic gripped the city as authorities struggled to solve the case until she was finally caught fleeing a murder scene. Barraza later confessed a deep resentment toward her abusive mother and was sentenced to 759 years in prison. Vlad the Impaler earned his name through the methodical terror he inflicted on his enemies. When the mighty Ottoman Empire invaded his territory in 1462, they were met with a nightmarish sight: a forest of 20,000 impaled corpses mounted on tall wooden stakes and left to rot beneath the scorching summer sun. The victims, captured soldiers, peasants, and anyone who defied Vlad, including children, were arranged with chilling precision, their decomposing bodies spreading a stench of death for miles. Upon seeing this grotesque display, Sultan Mehmed II was so disturbed that he ordered his army of 100,000 men to retreat. Chandler from Mr. Beast videos suffers from a genetic eye condition called a chromatopsia that only allows him to see the world in shades of white, black, and gray. It's a rare form of color blindness where all three cone types are completely absent from the eye, resulting in the inability to perceive any colors whatsoever. Scottish guitarist Les Harvey, known for performing with multiple rock bands throughout the 60s and 70s, narrowly escaped death in a fatal car crash in 1965, only to be fatally electrocuted on stage in 1972 after touching an ungrounded microphone. This gravestone is shared by twin sisters Emily and Minnie Dodsworth. Emily lived for just 2 days, while Minnie lived for over 100 years. In 2003, a Houston doctor stepped into an elevator when its doors malfunctioned and suddenly closed on him. The elevator then shot upward unexpectedly before the man could fully enter, instantly severing his head and shoulders while leaving the rest of his body in the hallway outside. A young nurse inside the elevator was physically unharmed but severely traumatized after she was stuck inside the elevator with the doctor's remains for several hours. Muppets creator Jim Henson's death was made all the more tragic by how easily it could have been prevented. In May of 1990, he dismissed what seemed like mild flu-like symptoms, unaware that his body was actually under attack by a rare strain of Group A streptococcus. The bacteria ravaged his lungs, filling them with blood and fluid as he slipped into septic shock. By the time he stumbled into the ER, several of his organs were already shutting down, as doctors described it as being hit by a freight train of bacteria. Despite frantic attempts to save him, Henson died at age 53, 20 hours after arriving at the hospital. Medical experts later said that if he had arrived just a few hours earlier, he likely would have survived. In a chilling discovery, archaeologists have found the first physical evidence of ancient Roman gladiators battling wild animals, an 1800-year-old skeleton in York, England bearing lion bite marks on the pelvis. Excavated from Driffield Terrace, a site believed to be a gladiator cemetery, the remains belong to a man aged between 26 and 35. The bite marks on his pelvis showed no signs of healing, indicating that the injuries were most likely fatal. The gladiator was also found to have been decapitated, either as a ritual practice or mercy killing after the brutal mauling. Standout college basketball star Len Bias was drafted second overall in the 1986 NBA draft, hailed as a future legend and often likened to Michael Jordan for his explosive athleticism. But just 2 days later, while celebrating his selection with friends, Bias collapsed after snorting high-grade cocaine in a University of Maryland dorm room. He suffered a massive cardiac arrhythmia as his heart seized violently and he started convulsing. Despite the desperate attempts to revive him, Bias was pronounced dead within hours. His sudden drug-induced death sent shockwaves through the sports world, forever turning him into a tragic symbol of unrealized greatness. In 2010, 35-year-old Steve Carter made a startling discovery when he found an age-progressed image of himself on a missing children's website. Though he knew he was adopted, this led to the shocking discovery that he was actually Marks Barnes, a child that was abducted in Hawaii in 1977. When he was just a baby, his biological mother had kidnapped him during a custody dispute, changed both their identities, and raised him under a fake name. DNA tests confirmed his true identity, and after 34 years, he was reunited with his biological father, who had never stopped searching for him.